Okay, so hello everyone. Today I'm going to be teaching JavaScript. This is the first lesson on JavaScript. So you guys already learned like HTML and CSS. So you know that HTML is kind of like the structure of the code. So in our house analogy, it's basically the wooden frames of like, for example, the door. And CSS is like the styling. So whether that door is going to be blue or red, that will be taken care of by CSS. JavaScript is actually going to take care of like the behavior and functionality of the code. So it's very important today's lesson because that's just actually how you're going to get your website to do the things that you want. Like, for example, like actually have buttons that do certain things. Yeah. Okay. So just an intro to JavaScript. It's very similar to any high-level language like Python and Java, just regular Java. Like I mentioned before, it does all like the behaviors and it's the powerhouse of any websites. Here's just like a really quick snippet of what you might see in JavaScript. I'm not going to go too much into it because I'll explain it as I go, but you might just be wondering like, what does that mean? What does const mean? What is this like weird arrow thing over here? Just questions to keep in mind that I'll definitely answer as we go along. Okay, so just basic syntax. So here are the three main ways to define a variable in JavaScript. So we have var, const, and let. So var is just a normal variable. Const is for constant. So for example, if you have gravity is always going to be 9.6 and that doesn't change. So that is in a case that you would use const. Let is for more defined variables. So you might be wondering like what the difference between var and let is. And it's actually like pretty complicated like background to it because it has something to do with scoping, but scoping is like just kind of like for lack of a better term, out of scope right now. So like basically I won't mention it too much, but basically for most cases, in fact, like pretty much all cases, use let because let is like more used frequently, but var was used a lot in the past. So you'll still see var around in a lot of older codes, but let does everything var does, except even better. So basically use const anytime you don't reassign a variable and use let every time you are going to be reassigning a variable. Let me see if there's any questions. Okay, so someone asked, should we be taking notes somewhere? It's kind of up to you. We do have like a Notion, which I posted in the Slack of like notes that you could read through after the lecture. It's a little bit, it has like a little bit different content than what I'm going to be talking about. So I think you should read that on your own time. But you can take notes however you want or not. You can also just listen along. That also works. Okay. And okay, so someone also asked again, what's the difference between let and var? So var and let have a scoping difference to them. Basically, var has more defined scope versus let is, it just has more scope. So I think it's not that important for you to know the difference. Just know always to use let basically. But anytime you see var, just kind of think of it the same as let.
I have a quick question too.
Yeah, go ahead. Is that Roman?
Yeah, Roman.
Oh yeah, Roman. Yeah, what's up?
So I was looking through the lesson plan on the Notion, and I pulled up the two index and the experiment.js file, and I had a question about those.
Okay, the question on the Notion. Okay, actually, do you mind if we like ask that at the end of the lecture? Because I think the Notion might have different material. I could definitely like answer that question at the way end.
Sure.
Yeah,
no
thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, so I got another question. Can you use let for a value that you're not going to change? Yeah, you can, but the reason why we use const is because it helps avoid like if you know that the variable is not supposed to change, like gravity is not supposed to change, and somewhere along your code it does end up changing, you know you did something wrong with your code. So it's a better practice to use const just so if it changes, it would have an error and you know that something went wrong with your code. So that's just kind of like a reason to use const. So should we code along to today's lecture? And if so, how do we start? What files should we open? Okay, so there's actually nothing you need to do to prepare for this lecture. So there's nothing you need to download. So just feel free to just like, yeah, watch this or take notes. But I'll just be like having like some live demos. So you don't need to download anything. Yeah. Okay, let me go ahead and continue. Okay, so just like any other language, you can declare the variables first. So just to do that, you do like var x, var y, and to actually assign it to something, you would use an equal sign. So for example, you want to assign x to 5, just do x equals 5. Yeah, and something to note, there's different types within JavaScript. So there's Booleans, which are like true falses, strings, which are basically always in quotes. And we also have like numbers. So there's not really big of a difference between integers and like doubles or decimals. Within JavaScript, it's basically just numbers. So yeah, let's move on. So operators. Operators is just standard: plus adds numbers, multiplication, asterisk thing multiplies numbers, the / divides numbers, plus increments a variable by 1, minus decrements a variable by 1. Some other new things that you might notice though is that plus can also concatenate strings. So for example, let me show you on my actual file structure here. And actually, I think it would be a good idea to just show you like how HTML is linked to JS. So basically, you guys already know how to create an HTML file, but to create a JS file, you just write .js at the end. And to actually link them together, you would put within a script tag. It's standard practice to put this right at the end of, right before your body tag ends. You're going to just put source and the link of your JavaScript file. So that's how you connect them to make sure they communicate back and forth.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that makes sense in how you connect, JavaScript to your HTML.
Mhm.
But do you only include like one JavaScript file, or do you do it like each time you need to do different stuff with JavaScript? Like, what's the norm? How are you supposed to go about that if you have like a lot of JavaScript on your page?
Okay, so usually this is a little bit more complicated of an answer, because actually when you actually code things, it's usually not entirely in JavaScript. You would use like a framework that we're going to talk about more later. But for example, a framework that you could use would be like React. And in React, it's kind of split by components. So for example, in every single website, you'll see like everything is a different component. Like this plus sign is a different component than this like this whole like bar right here. So those would be split into like different components, and in each of those components would be a different file. So actually in like React, the JavaScript and HTML are put into one file. So we'll explain that more later, but to answer your question, it's kind of split by functionality. So we don't want it to be too crowded into one file structure. So we want it to be like split by components and their functions.
That makes sense. Is React a new language, or is it like the VSC program?
Okay, so React is, I think it's actually defined as a framework. So it's not particular language. The actual language within it is called JSX, which is a mixture of JavaScript and HTML. And so, yeah, it's actually used to compile JSX. Yeah, and I think actually someone asked like, how do you run JavaScript? And if there a compiler like Java or no? So to answer that question, I think we'll go into this more into another lecture as well, but there is something called Node.js, which I think you guys might have heard of before. And Node.js is basically something that allows you to run JavaScript outside of your browser. But I don't think we don't need it currently because right now we're just using basic JavaScript. Does that answer both of your guys' questions? Yes, no problem. Let me see. Is there a relationship between the two languages? No, they're basically, they have like some syntactical like similarities, but they're not the same language. How do you run React? I think we have a specific lecture on that, so I won't go too much into it. But that is definitely something that we'll teach later and is more focused on in the front end track if you guys are interested in that. Okay, I'm gonna continue on. Okay, so I also wanted to mention like back onto concatenating the strings. So this is a case in which we add two strings together. And in this case, you might be wondering, what is X? So anytime when you're coding and you don't know what the value is and you want to check it, always use console.log. So this is the equivalent to print in Python. And this is how you debug, basically. Anytime you want to see what is X, use console.log, put in X, and we will go run it in our browser. So I went ahead and just like dragged the HTML onto another tab. So if we refresh this, actually, I'm not sure if you guys learned how to get this thing out, but basically it starts off as empty because I actually have no HTML here. So it's an empty page, of course. To get to your console, right click and press inspect. Then you'll get this, this is called the developer tool. And then you go to console. And this is where you can see anything that you print out. So in our case, we get hello, hello concatenated together because of our addition of two strings. Okay, so let me continue onward. Okay, actually, let me see if I can make this screen split so you guys can see both my live code. Okay, this works better. Yeah, so there's also something else that might be neat to know. If you multiply a number and a string, it's going to repeat that string, that amount of numbers. So that's what you can see here. So 3 times hello is going to make hello, hello, hello. Okay, so let's move on to conditional statements. Actually, I think okay, so we have a question. JavaScript is a scripting language. Yeah, it's a scripting language. And then is the only difference between scripting language and programming language logic? Honestly, I don't think I can answer that one like that well. I think it'll be a good idea to just like search that up. I'm not sure the actual specific definition of a scripting language, but it's definitely different than like HTML, which is like a markup language, which is not actually a coding kind of programming language. Okay. Okay, so if-else statements are basically conditional statements. So anytime you want to say if something is going to be true, you're going to execute this code within the curly brackets. So this is something that is specific to JavaScript syntax. It's in curly brackets. Yeah, every time you want to check another conditional, you can do else if, and then finally else. It's just like any other programming language. And actually, I think I have the thing printed out right here. So just in case you guys want to actually see, in this case, what is greeting, always use console.log and run it. Actually, let me first take this one out. Run this. So you might wonder like why nothing is appearing. That's because I haven't really gotten to functions yet, but every time you create a function, you have to call on it for it to show. So make sure to always call on it. And if we refresh, we should see good evening come out because time is 21 and it's not less than 10, it's not less than 20, and it's going to be good evening. Yeah, I think actually, There was a question earlier that says minus minus x and plus plus y. Honestly, not sure. I've never seen people do that before, but maybe you could test that on your own or search that up. But I think for functionality's sake, it's the same amount of letters. So yeah, x plus plus and x minus minus should do fine. Okay, so someone is saying, I'm not seeing the results. Yeah, so it's actually in the console. So it might be a little too small, but yeah, it's right here. Yeah, I wasn't able to increase the size of this for some reason, but yeah, it's always in your console what you're printing out, because remember that HTML is what's printing out here, but JavaScript, because we haven't put it into an HTML yet, it's not going to show up on the actual website. Right now, to print it out, we're using console, which is going to print that in your developer tools. So it's always going to be in your console. Okay, so we see. We have another question. Also, greeting is never given a variable name. Does that work in JS? So in this case, I feel like, honestly, that is a great question because I feel like it should have errored. Let me see. I'm actually kind of curious. If I do time here, let's see if that errors. Okay, so I guess you don't actually have to do let. Actually, I'm going to get back to you on that question, but that's a great question. I'm going to definitely jot that down. And I'll try to like post in the Slack afterwards if I find that to your question, Amir. Okay, let me continue onward. Okay, so for loops is basically just like any other language. It's more similar to Java. So you have to start at a certain variable. You just always set like I equal to 0, and then you can put, that's your starting variable. Then you can put your conditional, in which if it satisfies that conditional, it will keep running everything inside that for loop. And the third variable to the right of the semicolon is basically after each for loop, how much I is going to be changed. So yes, this is basically an example of one for loop. Let me see. I think I actually have an actual, yeah, I can show you an actual demonstration of for loop. So this is a function. We're going to call on it, and this is our for loop. Any guesses as to what this might show in our console? For hellos. Okay, let's test it out. So yeah, basically for hellos, it starts initially as hello in the 0th iteration. So whenever I'm confused, I always like to draw it out. So just like that, in the first iteration, it's going to be hello. Then we're going to concatenate the other hello to it. And it's going to keep doing that until I is equal to 2. So I equals to 2. Then it's going to run that one as well. But then once I equals 3, it's going to stop. And then that is why we have 4 hellos. Because since it's less than, it's different than less than equal to, by the way. Yeah, so it will stop right at the end of 2. Okay. So here is a while loop, which is very similar to a for loop. It's just going to run every time this conditional is satisfied. So yeah, in this case, this specific example, it's going to do the number is, actually, we did not initialize I, but let's say let I was equal to 0. Then it would say the number is 0, the number is 1, the number is 2, the number is 3, all the way until 9. And also we didn't initialize text, but make sure to initialize that as well. Okay. So Amir says this would probably still run. So I think this is similar to your previous question. This would not run because I is not set equal to anything in the beginning. So it's going to be like, what is I? So in our case, make sure to do let I equals to 0 and text equals to like empty string. I'm going to check on that specific greeting question later because that's like a little bit different than this scenario. But yeah, I will definitely get back to you on that. Okay, and here is like a pop quiz. I'll give you the answer. It's not a real quiz, but yeah, take a look at this. And if you guys know what result is, could you type it in the chat or say it out loud? If you have any questions along the way too, here's a good time to ask any of those questions you've been thinking of. Okay, so we have x is less than 3. Yes, that is correct. Just to go over it, x starts with 5. The for loop is going to decrement x 5 times. It's going to do it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is a total of 5. And then now x is going to become 0. So since x is 0, it's less than 3. Result is going to be equal to 3. Or not 3. X is less than 3. Okay. So let's go on to functions. Any questions so far? Any, like, even if you think it's a dumb question, feel free to ask. Yeah, feel free to ask any question. Okay. All right, so functions, we've been writing functions all along, actually, so it's not too different. Main things are just syntactical things to keep in mind. So the function name goes right after the keyword function. Yeah, in Python, you use def. In JavaScript, you use function. So you also might notice that it's in camel case. Everything in JavaScript is usually in camel case. And that's basically when the first letter is not capitalized and all words after that are capitalized. And then within two parentheses, within opening and closing parentheses, you can put as many parameters as you want. And those are the parameters that you need and that you're going to be using within your function. So return is going to actually return the value. And whenever it hits return, it's going to end that function. So it's not going to continue on. It's going to stop right where it reaches return. And don't forget that there are semicolons after every line, as well as curly brackets to close and open functions. So in our case, our add then multiply function 1, 2, it's going to take 1 plus 2 times 2, which is going to equal to 6. Okay. Okay, arrow function. So this is just a shorthand way. I think it's good to know because a lot of people use this and you might be wondering like what it is. It's basically exactly the same as a function, but like it's just written in a way that is a lot shorter. So let's see. We have a question. Are semicolons mandatory in JavaScript? Yeah, they're mandatory. So every time you forget one, it's going to complain. So make sure to check out for that first thing. Yeah. Okay. So arrow functions, basically, you can kind of compare it to like the previous function we have here. So this is your function name. The parameters are after the equal sign, and then you use the equal and then the greater than symbol. And that's going to go at like whatever is inside your function. So actually, you can omit like the return if you're just returning something directly. So in this case, we don't need the return, and we can just write that. So as you can see, it simplifies it a little bit a lot of people just don't like to have things in like 5 lines of code and want to simplify it. So this is just a good way to simplify. Another thing you might be thinking is like why we use let here instead of function. In this case, the arrow function, you have to set it equal to like actually assign it to one of the declaration variables. That's because you're actually making the function equal to an actual variable now. So just make sure to put let here all the time. And okay, let me see. I think maybe this is actually not in the slides, but I think I want to mention it really quickly as well. So I'm gonna go paste some code into my live code right here. I'm going to delete this. So, okay, let me put this here. All right, let me actually close this so we have more space. Okay, so here is an example of an arrow function. And something else that I wanted to mention is this is called a ternary operator, which is also another shorthand thing. So this is similar to arrow functions. It's just another shorthand way to write things. So this is shorthand for an if statement. So if this is true, it's going to carry out this. And if it's false, it's going to carry out what's after the colon. So that's something that I think is kind of important to know. Though they're not in the slides, I think it's a pretty nifty trick that you should know and that a lot of people use within JavaScript. So if we want to actually run this, let's say, let's close this one because we have duplicates, but let's say even odd is the name of a function and we want to run 3. So in our case, we're expecting it to run odd. Let's see if that's correct. So yeah, it shows odd because it's going to check is 3 mod 2 equal to 0, and it's going to be false. So it's going to show odd into our console. Okay, we have a question. Google form check-in today. Yeah, I'm gonna release like a Google form at the near the end of lecture, and I'll tell you like the magic word to put inside it. Okay, so I have someone asked to go back to the previous slide, so I'm gonna just go back really quick. If there's any questions right now, feel free to put it into the chat. Okay. So now we're going to be talking about arrays. So arrays are objects within JavaScript. And just like Python, it's practically the exact same syntax of brackets. And it can be any type. So it can actually mix types. So you can actually have an orange, and like true. It can be any sort of type within your array. And things to note is that you can use specific properties. There are so many properties, I don't even know all of them, but like things that you should know that you use a lot is .length. That shows all the length of your array. So fruits.length in this case would be 3 because there's 3 items within your array. .push is kind of like append. It's if you do .push and put lemon in here, it's going to add lemon into the end of your array. And just like Python, if you do 2 with the bracket, it's going to return the second index. Remember, it's always 0th index. So 0 is apple, the first index is orange, and the second index is banana. Okay, and something else that I think is kind of neat to know is what's called a spread operator. So let me go ahead and show an example of the spread operator. And also I see another question. Are single and double quotes interchangeable? I believe so, yeah. We have, can we apply a parameter to a function in the same line? Parameter to a function in the same line. What do you mean by a parameter? Occurring. Oh, honestly, I forgot what occurring is. I remember we learned that in 61A. If you could provide like an example, I could maybe check on that later. But I'm gonna continue for now.
I think you
Okay.
just meant like calling a function and defining it at the same time.
Coding a function.
Yeah,
Defining
like
it.
essentially, like if you're going, do you mind uncommenting let even number, odd number, like that function?
This one?
Yeah, like applying 3 to this function. Is there any way we can do it in one line so you don't have to call even odd of 3?
Even odd. Oh, so you want to call and do it at the same time?
Yeah, because like I don't get what's the difference between defining a function and kind of defining it this way, because what this seems like to me is like it's a lambda function. So essentially we're trying to like, make a function call in one line. So I wouldn't see like the application of this, like why would it even be better than just defining a function if it's the exact same thing?
Okay, so your question is just like what's like the difference of these two, or like what's better? So oftentimes like it's kind of hard to see with like really small code, but like oftentimes like if you're like writing a code and you just like don't want to like call on like a whole other function like this one, if you put like a function here, you'd have to like create like another function within here, and then like call on that function like within. But like a lot of the times you can just use this and just call it like straight in, rather than having to write a whole other function at like outside of it. So that's like one of the use cases I can see for like how it can simplify. Um, uh,
Are we allowed to have nested functions in JavaScript?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So yeah, that's just one of the cases I can see. And a lot of times it does actually simplify things. It just might not look like too much with this example. But I think when you ask like a question of like, can you call it and like call and create like the function at the same time? Like, no, it has to, you have to call it outside the function. I think that was what you're asking. Okay. So, okay, does push work like append? Yeah, so push is basically like the equivalence to append. Okay,
Can I ask a question?
yeah, go ahead.
My Wi-Fi cut it since Amir asked his question. So what was the answer? Can you call and define in the same line or no?
No, you can't code and define
Okay.
at the same line.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let me move on to talking. Oh yeah, I was talking about the spread operator. Okay, so what the spread operator does is basically duplicate the array. So if you guys have taken like a coding class before, you might remember like, oh, like a shallow reference and like a deep copy. So the problem a lot of the times is that it creates a shallow copy, but what you have with the spread operator is that it's going to create an entirely new copy of it. So what it does is, for example, you want to add like grape to the end of fruits, right? Then you would just do ... fruits and then grape, and then you're going to set that equal to another fruit. So we still have fruits, which is a 3-item array, and then another fruits is going to be a 4-item array. So let's see if we can just print that out. Let's see if there's, okay. Yeah, so it's going to be a 4-item array now. And just something else I think that is good to know is that you can actually like index into a variable that's not within your array. I know in some languages that would create an error, but that wouldn't create an error in JavaScript. So if you were to do 4 and put in papaya, it would actually give you a valid array. Let's go ahead and console.log and print that out. So as you can see, like it's going to go it's the fourth element, but we didn't assign anything to the third element. So it's just gonna make that third element an empty. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one. Let's see if there's any questions. Oh, someone asked, where can we find a list of all the words that JS knows? I'm sure you can like search up like, are you talking about like specific words for like arrays, for example? You could definitely search up like array properties.
Oh, sorry. The question I had was, I don't know if it's called like the syntax or the language or the term for it, but all the words like, console, let, log, like all the words that JavaScript knows so that we know what we can type in, like all the, I guess, HTML tags equivalent for JavaScript.
Okay. So there's actually like a legitimate, like written by the people who create the JavaScript. They have a documentation for that. So I'm sure if you search like JavaScript documentation, it will show like all the kind of things that you might need, but usually that's going to be a really extensive document. So usually if you want to, for example, like search up like how would you print something in JavaScript? You can just search that in Google and then it will show you like console.log. If you want to know like all the properties of an array, so actually if you use VS Code, if you just do dot, it will show you a lot of them. And like, I don't even know what some of these are, like copy within and stuff, but like you can definitely search those up, or you can just search like properties of arrays, like or array properties to use on like Google, and it'll show you all of them and how to use them. Okay, and then Kamal asked, what did fruit 4 equals papaya output? Oh, okay, let me go ahead and go back. So it outputs an array that's now of length 5. And because we didn't fill in anything into the third element, it's gonna make the third element empty. Yes, okay, I'm gonna continue on to object. Okay, so objects are basically kind of like key value pairs, kind of similar to a dictionary, sort of. So I think the best example of to just look at it is just to look at an actual example. So here is an example of object. So we called it me, and it's equal to, it has properties name and location. So name actually has its own properties within it. So it's actually like an object within an object. And the name properties have first and last. And yeah, that's just an example of one of them. Someone asked the question, if we did fruit 3 equals papaya, yeah, that would work. That would just work exactly like just like appending a regular papaya like onto it. Just, it would look like that. Okay, cool. Let me continue onward. I think I have this code already written out, so I'm just going to paste it into here. So like this thing says, for example, you want to access Brian, so that's the first of the name. So to do that, we're going to do console.log to print that out. We're going to do me dot name dot first. And that's going to retrieve Brian. Let's go ahead and verify that we did that correct. Okay, cool. Okay, and another way to do it is to use bracket notation. So there's 2 ways to do it. You can do dot notation or you can do bracket notation. But if you do bracket notation, make sure to put it into quotes. So yeah, that would both work. The reason why sometimes brackets might be better is this is just kind of a more like specific case. But for example, like you might not necessarily know that you want name. Like for perhaps like you might want location. You don't really know. So it could be like let selection and then equal to name. but selection could potentially like change into location later, right? So in that case, you can just put selection into here. But if you were to do me.selection, this would error out because it would be like, there's no selection that's part of me. So that this would error out, but this wouldn't error out. So that's just one case in which a bracket is better. But for most cases, a dot works perfectly fine. Apparently, never actually seen anyone do this before, but you can actually have a function inside an object. So if you do dog.speak, so dog is the property of speak. If you do .speak, it's going to print out woof woof. Though I actually think that there's not many cases in which you need to actually do that. But yeah, that is pretty much objects. Are there any questions? Let me see into the chat. Can name be called something else, like be some other property? So name would error out if it was like, if you mean like, if you would have put in like a different property here, like this would have errored out. But if you want to change like name up here, like that's totally fine. That's just up to you, whatever you want to call it. So you can call it like names and just make sure it matches when you call on it. Can you have an infinite number of name value things in an object? So yeah, you definitely can. A lot of the times when like you're actually coding a website, the name value could like potentially be updated a lot of times. For example, if you have like another user, it's going to create a whole nother object, and that's going to be like infinitely, basically, right? So it definitely can have an infinite number. So if we want to do the bracket equivalent of me.name.first, then it's me. Yeah, exactly. I also wanted to point out something. You can actually have arrays also as your value. So let's see. So does anyone know like how to access favorite fruits apple? Because could anyone guess? It's pretty what you might think it is. Let's say we wanted to just take out apple. Yeah, let me write that out to verify onto our console. So if we do favorite fruits, 0th element, because apple is our 0th element. If we were to refresh that, we're going to get apple. So yeah, nice job. Okay, so what will happen if we did console name? Will it print out first and last name? Yeah, so actually it will return a object because it itself is an object. So let's just test that out. Names. Oh, that's because I didn't do me.names. Okay, so it will return an object just like the initial me. So if you actually want to see how me looks like, you can actually expand it open, and within it, you can see like more specific. So that is why I think console is definitely something you should be using very often. Can you access a value by its name or only by its index? Access a value by its name. Do you mean like the array? Access a value by its name. So okay, me names. Oh, yeah, that completely works. So that's basically just going to give you the same as oh, actually, why is it a red line? Okay, I think that's because it's doing the weird quotes. But yeah, this is going to do the same as me.names.first. Let's verify to double check. So it's going to return Brian. Yeah. Yeah, okay, that is pretty much it for lecture actually. So I'll just be answering questions, but I'll put the attendance form out right now. Actually, we have a pop quiz, but let's do attendance first. Okay, so I'm going to post a form into the chat, and I'm gonna make the secret word papaya. Yeah, we did finish early today, but you can say after if you have like any questions. I remember like Roman had a question, so yeah, I can try to answer that. But yeah, you guys can feel free to go after we finish the pop quiz though. Oh, I will put that into the chat. Papaya.
Is this a graded pop quiz?
No, it's not. These are just to make you scared, but they're not actually. I'll tell you the answer in like 1 second. Yeah, Amir, I will definitely make like a post into the Slack after I figure out that let question. Oh, okay, someone asked the question. I missed it, but did me.lasdjknfa whatever this thing? No, it will not work because it will be like, what is that? I've never seen that before. We could try to test it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, what's up?
Oh, sorry, were you answering something else?
Oh no, I basically finished that question.
Oh, if you go back to the slides, in the pop quiz, I thought parameters of functions should be between parentheses, so like people between parentheses.
Okay, that's a good question. So actually with the arrow functions as well, you don't have to if it's one parameter. I don't know why they're making so many ways to make it shorthand, but it is another way to make it shorthand. If you are too lazy to put in a bracket, you can just put people if it's just one parameter. If you put a bracket around it, it wouldn't hurt either. So that's just another way to write it.
I see. Okay, so like here to just take alex.class and replace it with replace CS 160 with 189.
Yeah, exactly. You basically answered the question. Why is my gray box not disappearing? But you basically answered it exactly correct. So it's just going to update people.class inside this object to be CS 189.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. And that's it for lecture.
Can I follow up with my question?
Yeah, for sure. What's your question?
So if you go to the Notion, I was looking at the class, class like lesson plan.
Okay, let me take a look at the Notion really quick. Let me actually, okay, let me stop share so I can pull up the Notion.
Where's chat? I'll put the link into the chat so you can see the page where I'm at.
Okay, perfect.
But they gave us two files, a index HTML file and a experiment JavaScript file. And I was messing around with them, and I created the two files. And they said if we created the index file and open that up, we should see the results of the JavaScript file combined with it. However, when I opened the HTML file, I didn't get the results from the JavaScript. I just got the words that were in the HTML file.
Interesting. Okay, let me take a look at that really quick.
Going through to the
oh yeah. Wait, what'd you say?
Oh, I'm just like, I'm completely new to coding. So like,
oh, okay.
I learn is, just fresh. So I'm trying to make sense of it as I go.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, what's up?
Commenting on this, like for example, now we linked JavaScript with HTML, but we didn't see anything like on the HTML. like we will start seeing it when we actually put JavaScript inside like tags?
Okay, so you're wondering when you'll actually see the JavaScript, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so I kind of mentioned it before, but like when you have React, it's a mix of JSX, so JavaScript and HTML. So if you want to actually render something, like render a function or something, it's actually a particular thing you'd have to know in React, but you put it within curly brackets within your HTML basically, and it's going to actually run that function. So basically, that's how you actually print things out from your actual JavaScript. So if you put things in curly bracket and run that JavaScript within your HTML, it's going to show on your HTML because it's not within your HTML file. So we'll definitely go into that more in
Right.
detail, but did that make kind of sense?
Yeah. So we'll basically like learn it later, but we use curly brackets in the HTML file and reference things in the JavaScript file.
Yeah.
And
Actually,
only works with React.
oh, what'd you say?
And this only works with React.
There's other frameworks as well, but we're going to be teaching you React. I think you mentioned that like there's a JavaScript file. Actually, there is no JavaScript file when you actually code in React because it's all in .jsx, which is a mixture of JavaScript and HTML in one file. So you won't be having a separate JavaScript file. But you can create like all your functions within that one file, basically, or within another file and import it into another file.
Now, won't it get too messy if like both are in the same file?
I guess it might sound like that for now, but like once it actually happens, we'll show you like a couple examples, and it isn't messy at all. Like a lot of times what you want to display on a website is entirely dependent on like what the JavaScript is, because a lot of things aren't static in websites. So it's kind of important to be able to mix like the JavaScript in, and it doesn't become messy because that's like your main part of your website anyway.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, and I also see another question. Do objects have to be a const? No, they don't have to be a const.
Can you screen share and pull up the two files from the Notion?
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna try to troubleshoot that right now. I just gotta make sure that's the last couple of questions. Okay, yeah. Okay, let me try to figure that out right now. Yeah, but you guys can feel free to go because that is pretty much the end of lecture.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let me see. So could you show me like what specific HTML and JavaScript file you were talking about?
Yeah, scroll up slowly. I didn't get that far. Hold on, scroll down.
Scroll down.
Yeah, so this is the HTML file right there.
Okay.
Make a new folder and create this file, and then below is the JavaScript file.
This one is HTML, and then this one's the JavaScript.
And those two files, they said if you put them together in one folder and you open the HTML, you see like now if you see this right here, now if you open your HTML file, not the JS file, in your browser, oh, you should open your console and see the number. That's right.
Yeah. Oh, did you not open your console? Yeah, because it won't actually show on your actual browser. Yeah. Do you want to try it and see if it works right now?
Actually, I opened the console. I'm not sure where I see it. I'm on a.
Okay, so you don't see it.
Actually, no, I see. I was on Elements. Now I see console.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. No problem. Glad you got it working. Yeah. Do you have any other questions or?
I think that's it for right now. I'm gonna make sense of today's lecture.
Okay, yeah. If you have any questions, you could go to office hours or like post on the Slack or direct message, and I'll try to get those answered.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna end the recording.